while he is trying to connect. He's going to try and connect over the phone. So we are good to go.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So we're in public session. We already approved the agenda. If I make any mistakes, somebody just say something because I wasn't expecting this. So I'm just trying to get caught up here on the agenda. So we have approved our public agenda. And any declarations of conflict of interest? I don't hear any. Moving down to actions of the board meeting during private session. And before I do that, I'm just going to let everyone know that the agenda has been amended. And Melissa, I didn't write down the exact changes. I know them, but I just want to be sure. So can you share that?
Yes, we have added a special order of the day, as well as trustee question period is now agenda item I, notice of motion is now agenda item J, and adjournment is agenda item K.
Thank you. So now we're going to move to actions of the board meeting private session. We are looking at C1. Can I have someone move C1, please? Looks like Trustee Halberstadt. Can I have a seconder?
I'll second Trustee Sipcar.
Thank you, Trustee Sipcar. And all in support?
Support, Burgess.
Any opposed? And that passes. We are moving on to C2. May I have a mover?
So move.
Trustee Halberstadt, and a seconder?
Okay. I submitted to move, but in the chat line.
Mine's not coming up, and I apologize. Trustee Halberstadt moved it. A seconder?
I'll second, Trustee Cook.
Thank you, Trustee Olmsted. All in favor?
Support, Burgess.
Support, Olmsted.
Support, Sipcar.
Thank you. Any opposed? And that passes. So now we're going to move down to item G, presentation. First presentation is 2020-21 budget preview, and I'm going to...
Trustee Cook, just
Yes.
wondered where you're going to do the special order of the day. I know that Trustee Olmsted was going to read. I just didn't want it to be forgotten. Perhaps you have a place for it. It's a tribute.
Right. Would you like, let's do that first.
I think that might be in order. Thank you.
Let's do that right now.
Thank you.
So we're going to move to the order of the day. And I'll turn that over to, is that Trustee Olmsted?
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. It is with heavy hearts that we share that a beloved student from Leamington District Secondary School, Michael Liberty, has passed away after a valiant battle with cancer. Michael will be remembered by staff as an inquisitive student who possessed an uncommonly sharp intellect. Michael's shy smile, his caring nature, and his unassuming demeanor allowed him to make many lasting friendships. His quiet but undeniable presence was cherished by both his teachers and his peers. He will be held in our memories with the highest of regard. Ella, one of his closest friends, shared some thoughts about Mike. In May, when he started to get very sick, I hung out with him every day. I was with him when he got his tattoos, rode in the Lamborghini, and dyed his hair pink for the day. I have so many amazing memories of Michael that will last forever. Everyone will remember Michael as the guy who had colorful and cool shoes with outfits to match. Michael was the most caring, smartest, and most amazing person I've ever met. To Aaron and Dennis, his parents, know that he was much loved as a member of our school community, and he will forever be remembered as a roaring lion. On a personal note, on July 14th, 2020, we lost one of the most amazing kind, and intelligent humans ever to grace us. Michael was everything good, and he will be missed beyond words. I was made a better person by knowing him, and I am honored to be able to pay tribute to him tonight.
Thank you, Trustee Olmsted. We are now going to move to our presentation G1 2020-21 budget preview. And I'm going to ask Superintendent Armstrong to speak on that.
Good evening, everyone. This evening, we will be providing you with a budget preview for 2020-21. I would like to welcome and thank Sean Mayhew, our Manager of Financial Services, for his work to date on the budget, and in particular, navigating through another unusual budget process. Next slide, please. Tonight, we'll review on a high level for you the timelines and our current status, an overview of changes to the 2020-21 grants for student needs. We will take you through some highlights of the projected 2020-21 budget. We'll also discuss opportunities and risks. And then we will take a look at 2019-20 and provide an update with respect to COVID-19 and strike savings. And then we would be happy to answer any questions. Next slide. As noted on this slide are the timelines with respect to the budget process. Particularly of note, the GSN was released along with the technical paper and the ministry reporting system, which we refer to as EFIS, on June the 19th. Tonight, we're providing you with a budget preview, and we will be bringing forward and tabling the budget for board approval on August the 11th. And at that time, we'll have a very detailed presentation to take you through, and you also have your budget packages as well. That will provide a lot more detail in terms of the budget. Next slide, please. Looking at the funding changes with respect to the GSN for 2020-21, the salary benchmarks throughout the GSN have increased by 1%. This is excluding the director, senior administration, principals, and vice principals. A 1% retroactive increase was also negotiated for September 1st, 2019. So when comparing the 2020-21 budget to the 2019-20 budget, an effective increase of 2.01% to benchmarks has been provided in the GSN. This funding increase is directly offset by increased salary expenses. There will be no changes to the funded or regulated class size averages for the elementary panel. For the secondary panel, the funded average class size in the Pupil Foundation grant will be reduced from 28 to 23. This change effectively eliminates the teacher job protection funding, or as we've sometimes referred to it in the past as attrition funding. The net impact of these changes results in a funding decrease of $3,404,000. The adjustment to the secondary class sizes also impacts the adjustment in teacher qualifications and experience grant. An increase of $2,420,000 in funding relates to the secondary class size. Again, this funding is directly offset by an increase in teacher salaries. Next slide, please. With respect to online learning, as announced in the fall of 2019, students will be required to take 2 online credits to graduate from secondary school, starting with students entering grade 9 in September 2020. As part of this transition, an online learning adjustment has been applied in the cost adjustment in teacher qualifications and experience grant, recognizing the maximum average class size of 30 for online courses. As a result, a funding decrease of $28,000 will be included in the budget. With respect to sick costs, the ministry is increasing the supply teacher benchmarks by the equivalent of 1 additional day to recognize school boards' experiences with sick leave usage. This benchmark increase represents additional funding of approximately $511,000. Additional education software licensing. This funding is for educational software that supports learning in and outside of the classroom. It is being transferred to the GSN from existing ministry software licenses as they expire to provide school boards with flexibility to better address local needs. The board will receive the minimum of $30,000 of funding for this purpose. Next slide. New in 2020-21, the Supports for Students Fund and the Investments in Systems Priorities provides flexible funding for school boards to support the learning needs of students. Total funding of $3,736,000 is included in the budget. This funding is directly offset by additional salary and benefit expenses. 31 full-time equivalent positions have been budgeted with this funding. Included in the budget is $560,000 of declining enrollment adjustment funding because projected enrollment is less than enrollment that was reported in the fall of 2019 as part of the revised estimate submission. This grant may be eliminated if actual enrollment in 2020-21 is greater than projected. The school operations allocation has been updated to reflect a 2% benchmark update to the non-staff portion to assist with managing increases in commodity prices. Next slide, please. This is the final year of a 4-year phase-in of funding impacts of the new school foundation grant definition of a school based on campus that was introduced in 2017-18. A campus being defined as property or properties owned, leased, or rented by a school board that are linked by a contiguous property line. Previously, funding was based on the school identification number. Since Bellwood Public School and Giles Campus French Immersion Public School have the same school ID, and Forest Glade Public School and Forest Glade Primary Learning Center also share the same school ID, only 2 school locations out of the 4 qualified for the school foundation grant funding prior to the change. Each location is now considered its own campus, and all 4 qualify for funding. This additional funding of approximately $337,000 is being phased in over 4 years. Therefore, 100% of the additional funding is provided in 2020-21, which is an increase of $84,000 compared to the prior year. Next slide. In an effort to streamline funding and reduce administrative burden for transfer payments, the Partners in Priority Ship funding was transferred to the GSN. Funding levels remain consistent. Those items that have been transferred to the GSN include the mental health workers, which is enveloped, experiential learning, which will actually be transferred into the Learning Opportunities Grant within the GSN. Curriculum and assessment implementation will be transferred to the School Board Administration and Governance Grant. It will not be subject to enveloping provisions. And as well, executive compensation with respect to 2017-18 will be transferred to the School Board Administration and Governance Grant, and it will be enveloped. Additionally, in January 2020, the ministry launched a review of student transportation, which aims to achieve a more equitable and needs-based student transportation system. While the review is underway, the overall student transportation grant will be maintained at the previous year's funding level with adjustments for enrollment. Next slide, please. To better reflect their current purpose and in response to stakeholder feedback, the ministry renamed 4 allocations as noted on this slide. Next slide, please. Based on the Office of the Auditor General of Ontario's 2017 Value for Money audit, stakeholder feedback, and data analysis on factors that disadvantage students, the ministry has made adjustments to 3 allocations. The program leadership allocation has been moved from the school board administration and governance grant to become its own grant, now called the Program Leadership Grant. Funding will be consistent with the prior year. The Learning Opportunities Grant has been restructured into 2 components, the Experiential Learning Envelope and a Targeted Student Supports Envelope. Again, funding will be consistent. As well, the library staff allocation is moved from the Learning Opportunities Grant to the School Foundation Grant. Next slide, please. And at this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Mayhew, our Manager of Financial Services, and he will take you through the 2020-21 budget highlights.
Thank you, Superintendent Armstrong. Good evening, everyone. I have the next few slides. The following 11 slides will present at a high level the draft 2021 budget. As Superintendent Armstrong mentioned, the budget packages will be delivered on August 4th, next Tuesday, and will contain significantly more detail than what you will see now. The following is just meant to provide an overview or preview of the budget package. Next slide. The draft budget will present a balanced operating budget of $478.8 million and a balanced capital budget of $80.5 million. A balanced budget has no in-year surplus or deficit and no impact on operating accumulated surplus, which we'll show later in a later slide, and our accumulated operating surplus as at our last year end was $19.7 million. Prior year operating budget was $469.7 million. Therefore, the 2021 budget represents a $9.1 million increase when comparing budget to budget. Next slide. The board will continue to report a deficit for ministry compliance purposes, which represents the amortization or decrease to the committed surplus. Essentially, each year we are drawing down the fund we set aside to fully offset our capital deficit, which relates to LaSalle Public School and Better Places retrofit. And that is consistent with the prior year. Boards have been advised to be diligent in managing costs and to carefully review all discretionary program spending in their 2021 budgets. This has been our approach during the budgeting process. The GSN funds a conventional learning environment and is based on the assumption that schools will reopen in the fall and remain open the entire school year. There is no additional funding in the GSN that has been announced and included in the 2021 draft budget to address the pandemic. Therefore, the 2021 draft budget does not reflect unfunded expenditures related to COVID-19. This will be discussed in more detail later in the presentation. Next slide. As you all may know, enrollment is one of the major contributors to the funding formula. It affects a lot of the sections, a lot of the funding. And so I thought it would be best to just present an overall snapshot of enrollment, both looking at the projected 2021 enrollment with a comparison to the prior year budget, which is 2019-20, and the revised fall figures of 2019-20. Budget versus budget, we are showing an increase of 72.5 pupils. However, we're showing a decrease of 227.5 pupils compared to fall actual. For the purpose of all budget analysis, revenue and expense fluctuations, we always compare budget to budget, an apples to apples approach, essentially. A couple observations I'll make in showing you the projections here. You'll note we're projecting a decrease of 28 visa students budget to budget, or 48 visa students when comparing to fall actuals. And this is an attempt to be conservative based on the known travel restrictions and the health and safety concerns that are present right now in the current pandemic. When the projections were done, staffing was based on visa students that were enrolled at that time, so therefore they were budgeted at that time. But that is definitely one risk area in the budget. When we're looking at international students, that number could significantly drop off. And we'll have to keep an eye on that as we move into the fall. FDK registrations, you'll see, are down compared to both the budget and the revised budget. Projections were completed later in the year compared to prior years. And due to the pandemic, projections indicate that families are delaying the decision to register their child and perhaps considering not to register altogether. There is a risk that actual FDK registration is lower than projected based on how the pandemic unfolds. So another area we'll have to keep our eye on when we move into the fall. We'll have to look at those October numbers. Essentially, the funding is based on the October and March numbers combined. This is our best guess moving into the new year based on what we're seeing. Next slide. This slide presents an overview of all the staffing changes when looking budget to budget. Budget to budget, you'll see a total increase of 69.2 positions. Of those positions, 31 are directly funded by the Support for Students Fund and the Investment in Systems Priorities, which was funding created from the most recent collective bargaining process. And those positions have been determined in consultation with the unions. Some general comments on this slide. You can see that elementary teachers have increased 24. That increase is a result of enrollment when comparing budget to budget and adjustments to address class size. Secondary teachers, there's a reduction to transition to the 22-to-1 versus the 23-to-1 funded model. If you recall, in the prior year, even though we were moving to a 28-to-1 ratio at the time of class ratio, our collective agreement stipulated that we had to maintain the 22-to-1. So this budget to budget is showing a 22 to 23-to-1. The EAs, you'll see an increase in EAs. 3 additional EAs are to support 3 additional gains classrooms that are beginning this fall. Also, 12 EAs are directly offset by funding received through Jordan's Principle, which is funding that supports Indigenous students. Support staff, there's increases as a result of those gains classrooms I mentioned, and also to provide direct support for students. You'll see an increase in the consultants line. That specifically relates to a reclassification of positions as a result of the program lead allocation funding that has been transferred out of the school board administration line to its own grant. It now kind of falls under the consultants line, so we had to move some positions there out of board administration and governance. There's a decrease of 1 secondary vice principal. You'll see the administrative line is going down. That relates to the reclassification of consultant positions, net of 2 additional positions created as a result of direct funding offsets. All these details, of course, will be provided in the budget documents that you'll receive next week. The other professional line I'll mention relates to employment services and a reduction in total staff in that program. If you are comparing staffing to current staffing, so fall and spring staffing, excluding all the student support fund positions, we are actually down approximately 27 positions, and that relates to primarily to elementary and secondary teachers that are directly a result of enrollment and class size adjustments. Next slide. The next 2 slides provide a revenue and expense overview. Further details and calculations to be provided in the budget package next week. This analysis walks everyone through all the changes from budgeted revenue in 1920 to budgeted revenues in 2021. And this is all for ministry compliance purposes. So you may have seen a different revenue amount indicated previously in the presentation. The difference here is that there's some compliance adjustments related to employee future benefits that need to be put into the mix when we're submitting our budget to the ministry, and these calculations account for all those adjustments. So I'll quickly highlight some of the significant fluctuations in revenues. And a lot of these relate already to what Superintendent Armstrong has been spoke to earlier with the grant changes. The Pupil Foundation amount is primarily driven on enrollment. So enrollment increases budget to budget affect this line. There's increased benchmarks due to the collective bargaining. And the biggest change there, and why that amount is going up significantly, is directly a result of the secondary class size changing from 28-to-1 to 23-to-1. An amount that offsets that further on, I'll highlight that now, is the $9.6 or $9.7 million decrease you're seeing as the cost adjustment and teacher qualification grant. In the prior year budget, there was a job attrition protection grant that offset that significant decrease we saw in year moving to the higher class size. That's been reversed now to offset some of the increase in the Pupil Foundation grant. The foundation grant is going up because of the final year of a 4-year phase in the campus ID that we spoke about, and the reclass of the library staff amount to this line. Special education is based primarily on enrollment and is benchmark driven, no significant changes in that area. Indigenous is going, the Indigenous education grant is going up approximately $1 million as more class offerings qualify for that funding. The log line is increasing because there are items moving from other grants into the GSN that we spoke about. The mental health grant you'll see is going up, and that's primarily relates to the mental health workers PPF that's moving into the GSN now. You'll see the amount for declining enrollment. That's increasing, as Superintendent Armstrong mentioned earlier, because that looks at our enrollment compared to our revised budget. The board administration and governance grant you'll see is going down. That's because the program leadership grant is coming out of there and going on its own separate line, which is shown below. You'll see the total amount for support for students fund that was negotiated as a result of the collective agreements of $3.7 million. That is all to provide direct support to students through new positions and creation of positions. And you'll see that there's slight increases in school facility operations due to benchmarks and the 2% non-staff allocation for commodity increases. Our interest is going down slightly, and that's directly offset by a decrease in expenses. And our amortization is decreasing significantly too, offset by a decrease in expenses. That results, the reason for that is we reviewed our estimated useful lives at year end and adjusted those accordingly, which affected our amortization. However, it really has no budgetary impact when looking at revenue and expenses combined. So overall, a total revenue increase budget to budget of $8.45 million. Next slide. This shows overall the total changes in expenses versus expenses. I won't get into this in too detail because you'll notice that a majority of these changes are directly changes related to staffing, benefits. I did note one correction to the slide when I was reviewing. It says educational assistance includes a $250,000 staff contingency. That $250,000 staff contingency was taken out in order to balance the budget. So that no longer exists in that line. You can see overall, though, salaries and benefits make up a significant amount of the change. Other than that, you're looking at a budget that's status quo from an expense standpoint. For the most part, when we went through all the budget areas with each superintendent, with the director, and we had discussions, our goal was try to maintain and or reduce when possible. And you can see from that, really, there's not much else that's changing on a net perspective. The interest is something that's offset by interest, and the amortization is offset by amortization revenue. Other than that, there aren't significant changes. Next slide. And here you'll see really what the budget implications are on the operating surplus. As I mentioned, our operating surplus as at September 1st, 2020 is projected to be $19.7 million, pending, of course, what will happen for the remainder of the year, which we'll talk about in some later slides. And the capital budget, which represents, or that $11.0 million represents the amounts we set aside to offset our capital deficit. We're drawing that down by the amortization, and really that's the deficit you see for compliance purposes is the $953,000. Next slide. And I'll turn it back over to Shelley.
This is Superintendent Armstrong. With respect to the 2020-21 budget and COVID-19, the ministry has committed, as you'll see on this slide, $25 million in new funding for extraordinary costs related to the COVID-19 outbreak. $10 million of this is for mental health to support students with continued learning and well-being of students. Another $15 million is to support technology-related costs. Individual board allocations are unknown at this time. And as Mr. Mayhew has pointed out, the ministry has advised that boards be diligent in managing their costs and carefully reviewing all discretionary program spending. No further funding has been announced to address COVID-19 expenses, and what would be projected for COVID-19 expenses is going to vary based on the circumstances at the time. So, for example, the learning model that we are currently operating under would influence that, the progression of the virus, and if there's a sustained need for incremental expenses. And consideration will need to be given in terms of the amount of in-year savings that will be available to address pandemic-related expenses, and that would be available through redirection of unspent budget allocations, or the amount of expenses that can be incurred with the 2019-20 savings in preparation for the 2020-21 school year. Next slide. Based on information that we currently know, the board is working very hard to prepare for the resumption of school in September. We acknowledge that the health and safety of staff and students are a key concern. This slide outlines what we have been able to project at this point in time in terms of expenditures related to COVID-19. With respect to PPE, we are assuming that all staff will be provided with 2 masks per day. Spec ed workers will be provided with gloves, gowns, face shields, and masks. Custodial staff will be provided with masks and nitrile gloves. We've also allowed for contingency for price variances and for any changing guidelines. The board has already procured 2 months of PPE based on a competitive tender process. The Ministry of Government and Consumer Services has also procured for the non-health sector and is an available source of supply to the board. This should assist with achieving cost efficiencies in this area. As you also identify, as you also note on this slide, we have identified additional cleaning costs with respect to cleaning all of the high-touch surfaces and disinfection in our schools. And we will be hiring additional replacement custodians to supplement the existing complement of replacement custodians. In terms of technology, discussions, sorry, I might go on. I'm sorry, I wanted to go back with respect to PPE and safety measures. Other safety measures that we will be implementing include the procurement of stickers for floors to assist in directional flow, occupancy signs, and marking off of safety zones for teachers. Facilities Services is in the process of visiting every school, meeting with every principal, and measuring all office spaces in all of our sites. Vinyl barriers are being constructed internally to assist with cost-saving measures. Safe teaching zones are going to be marked off in every classroom. From a transportation perspective, we're not able to estimate what those potential costs will be at this time. Discussions are ongoing with respect to the PPE costs of bus operators and who will be responsible for covering the costs, along with the additional cleaning and disinfecting of buses. Additional bus runs may be required. This will depend on bus routing and bus occupancy limits. As the banker board for the consortium, the board will be procuring the PPE for the transportation consortium. Additionally, replacement and supply costs are something that we identify that will be an additional cost to the board, but we are unable to estimate it at this time. And that will really depend, I think, when we approach the reopening of our schools and our facilities in terms of if there are any health issues for staff that may influence their ability to report to work. Next slide, please.
And this slide here shows the capital budget that was discussed earlier in more detail. A couple comments I can make here are it's good to see that the renewal amounts and the school condition improvement amounts are maintaining a similar amount compared to the prior year. Those amounts are maintained, which is good news. And that just goes to show that there still are needs, and we have building improvement needs, but we're getting that funding, which is positive. Our approach in the capital budget is to put everything on the table every year, whether we think it's potentially going to be built in this year or not. If it's been approved, we want to show it to make sure it's on the radar. So all the capital priorities that you're seeing, New Kingsville, K-12, New James L. Dunn Public School, New North Shore, Legacy Oak Trail, the new dual campus high school in Amherstburg, all those capital priorities all flow through the capital budget. To the extent of the work we believe that's going to be done over the course of the year. Next slide.
We'd like just to take a moment now just to highlight again some of the opportunities and risks with respect to the 2020-21 budget. COVID-19, we've already just discussed. It's a very fluid situation and will require the board to pivot based on the circumstances that are presented. Enrollment, Mr. Mayhew has already mentioned enrollment risks. This is a standard or a typical risk to our budget in that actual enrollment could vary from our projections. And of course, there is the added complication this year. Should there be any further erosion to our international student enrollment due to the pandemic and travel restrictions, that again presents a risk. Supply and replacement costs is a typical risk to our budget. It may further be influenced by the impact of COVID-19, as I mentioned in the previous slides. With respect to utilities, on May the 1st, 2020, the Ontario government issued an emergency order to temporarily reduce the global adjustment rates to pre-COVID-19 monthly levels for April, May, and June. The order provides a deferral of the global adjustment charges and is expected to approximate a 15% reduction of actual global adjustment costs. This interim cost avoidance is expected to be recovered over a 12-month period beginning in January 2021. If the economy recovers quickly and the demand for electricity is high, the impact of the recovery of the global adjustment is estimated to be at $240,000. If there is a second wave of COVID and another shutdown, or the economy is slow to recover, the impact of the recovery of the global adjustment could be as high as $689,000. Defibrillators is another risk to our budget. Bill 141, which is called Defibrillator Registration and Public Access Act, had its third reading on March the 11th, 2020. If it's passed, the regulation provides further clarification on all public sites, such as schools, to have defibrillators. We currently have 25 defibrillators in our system. They include placement in every secondary school, 7 elementary schools, our admin building, facility services, our Mason Center, and Migration Hall. However, if this bill passes, we may need to purchase approximately 54 defibrillators for the remainder of our system. This would include for 49 elementary schools, our 3 employment assessment centers, the Jeep Center, and our Newcomer Center. Based on the same make and model of our current defibrillators, we would be looking at an additional cost, including signage, of $136,000. Again, the timing would depend on the requirements of the Act and the associated regulation. Community use of schools is another risk to our budget. This has been significantly impacted by COVID-19. The board has currently paused community use of schools, and we will make further determinations as circumstances evolve. Special education, again, is a typical risk that we have been explaining in our budget as well, as we know that this area is underfunded, and the board has reallocated non-envelope funding to support the needs in this area. To the extent that monies cannot be redirected or there are changes to non-envelope grants, our risk increases. Also, the needs of students in our area continue to rise, both in the number of students who require special education support, but also in the severity of the needs. And with respect to WSIB, the board is a Schedule II employer under the WSIB Act and assumes responsibility for the payment of all claims to its injured workers under the Act. The board does not fund these obligations in advance of the payments. As costs continue to rise and the complexity of work-related injuries increases, there is a risk that claims and costs are greater than budgeted. Next slide.
In this section, we'll provide an update for the current year, the 2019-20 year, addressing significant impacts such as the strike, sanctions, and also the impact that COVID-19 has had on the year. Next slide. In March, we reported $6.9 million of strike savings, representing salaries and benefit savings for the ETFO and OSSTF strike dates. You'll see we had some eligible expenses we reported of $24,000. Net strike savings of $6.87 million are reported and will be offset by a reduction in the grants. This ultimately has no budgetary impact on the 2019-20 or the 2021 year. Next slide.
This slide highlights the projected unspent GSN funding as a result of the school closure order. It also specifies the projected expenditures that have been funded through unspent GSN. So as you will see, because of the school closure order, we we realized savings with respect to occasional costs, part-time school aides. We were able to achieve savings in the facility services budget with respect to utilities, operations and maintenance, and transportation savings as well. In terms of projected incremental expenses that we have used the unspent GSN funding for, we had security costs with respect to checking our buildings every 48 hours as part of our OSB insurance requirements. There was very minor legal expenses incurred. With respect to technology, we have procured or we have purchase orders for an additional 2,000 laptops and 200 iPads. And we will be utilizing this funding to support those costs. As well, an additional 9,500 licenses for Lexia are being procured to support learning in grades 1 to 3, plus grade 5 in a blended learning model. We will also have a to deploy at our compensatory schools. PPE, as I have previously mentioned, we have procured 2 months worth of PPE supplies towards the 2020-21 school year. This also includes stickers for the floors to do wayfinding and the construction and the supplies required to make barriers in office spaces. Graduation, as you know, we did virtually this year, so there were costs that we funded to pay for the graduation signs for our graduates. With respect to transportation, the transportation savings that are in the revenue line, up above the $575,000, this represents the savings for the period of March the 13th to June the 30th. And this is where the board paid the inclement weather rate, and we've talked about this before, which is the regular rate, and it's less a 12% reduction for fuel costs. But you'll also notice now in the incremental expenses line, the ministry has clawed back some of that transportation funding for the months of May and June. So we benefited from the sense that we had savings from March 13th to June 30th, and the ministry then clawed back May and June's funding. And I also note that we also do have lost revenue with respect to our daycares and summer camps where we are not charging them. And because we have closed our schools and our facilities to community use of schools, there's lost revenue associated with that as well. I do also want to point out, while it's not specific on this slide because we did not use unspent GSN funding related to these savings, the board did incur other costs with respect to summer learning, and this was done through existing budget allocations with the individual superintendents. So there was summer learning expenses to deliver kits to students as well as iPads. That was about $65,000, and those iPads did have internet access. And there was other technology that was purchased at the beginning of the school closure order that we paid through the IT budget in a deferral of retiring school devices. And that was about $375,000. And that included remote management and protection for mobile devices, over 500 iPads, 500 laptops, Cogeco home internet costs, and some EDSB fees as well. Next slide. And at this time, we would be happy to take any questions.
Is Ron back?
Ron is back. He is just trying to unmute his phone, I believe.
All right. I'm just gonna continue then, and when Ron steps in, that's great. So our first question is from Trustee Sipcar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Superintendent Armstrong and Mr. Mayhew for this presentation. I had the chance to go through it thoroughly over the last few days, and you ended on a lot of the COVID updates, which I think is what a lot of, I think trustees, I'll speak for myself, but our community is concerned about in terms of cost. And so from what I'm hearing from your presentation, that you have basically the budget that we'll be seeing over the next few weeks, within the next few weeks, will be to fund the conventional model, so all kids returning to school. And you noted on the one slide that it's potentially $2.85 million of unfunded costs, but that means that we don't have any sort of funding source from the ministry at this point confirmed. And also there were big unknowns like transportation, and I forget what the few others are. And I guess what I'm wondering is, do you feel that our budget is an accurate representation of the costs for the upcoming school year as much as you can predict? And then the follow-up question to that is, if we have astronomical costs related to COVID, where do you see that money coming from?
This is Superintendent Armstrong. Thank you for that question. We can only budget based on what we know. And so from what we're presenting to you today, we're being as transparent as we can in terms of the projected costs. We know for sure that we need to procure PPE. And so we've done a competitive process and we've already purchased 2 months worth of supply. So those cost estimates that we're reflecting for 2020-21 are based on the prices that are being quoted as part of that competitive tender. We do realize as if the pandemic evolves or circumstances changes, then we may have to provide additional costs. There may be additional costs related to that. So we do appreciate that. We know for certain that we have to do enhanced cleaning in our schools and disinfecting at a minimum of high-touch services at least twice a day, based on the guidance that we're getting from the ministry and from our public health unit at this time. So the costs that we're projecting and that we've included represent an additional 60 replacement custodians that supplement the custodians that are already in our schools, both in the day and the afternoon shifts, to try and support that work that needs to get done. So to our knowledge, that also is an accurate, it's a good cost estimate. It's tricky and it's challenging because there's a lot of things that are not known. We've acknowledged, we know that there will be additional transportation costs, and those conversations are still ongoing. And we're making every effort to make sure that we provide for the health and safety of our staff and students. In terms of how it gets funded, we are not the only board. Every single board, all 72, have the same issue. To the extent where we have savings for 2019-20 from our unspent GSN funding, we've done that. We've bought the technology. We're buying technology now for the fall. We're already buying PPE for the fall and any costs for reconfiguration of our schools. Some things I can't fund though from 1920's funding. I can't pre-fund, for example, the costs for the additional custodians. I can only pay them when they've done the work. So there's some limitations and restrictions. Fortunately, we have a strong accumulated surplus position that I know Mr. Mayhew has taken the board or taken the trustees through. And like I've said, we will not be the only board that is in that position in terms of unfunded costs. And certainly circumstances could change in terms of funding. We don't know. We're doing the best that we can with what we know.
Thank you. And Trustee Sipcar has a supplemental.
Thank you. So I guess to go off that, the question about health concerns and trade-offs, and I guess I wonder if and I know we're not seeing line by line, and this is a high-level overview, so I take that, as it is. I just am concerned that we will be making trade-offs because we don't have the money allocated in advance, and so my concern still lies with how are we going to be funding these costs that will have to get spent, and I know that we can't predict, but do we have any sort of, and I know we do have a fairly large surplus, so I'm just kind of looking at some direction of saying, what if we have some astronomical costs? There's a few other boards who have put out preliminary plans that if they fully fund, a 15 cohort hybrid model, this is what that cost will be. Are we concerned that if the ministry directs that, we're not going to have enough money even in our surpluses? So I guess I'm looking at some direction of like, where are, where are we going to get that money if we have to, if push comes to shove, I guess.
This is Superintendent Armstrong. I'm familiar with some of the reports that have been in the news with respect to what some boards are projecting. It's hard for me to comment on that because I really don't know the assumptions that they are making and what they're including in those costs. We have a healthy surplus. If we absolutely need to, then we will use our surplus to pay for the COVID costs. But at this time, we feel that we have, we are able to accommodate, for example, right now the ministry guidance is 15 students in a classroom. We are able to accommodate that to the best of our knowledge with our existing staff. And we believe that we have we are able to accommodate, and we are projecting the best we can the PPE costs that are required, along with the added cleaning costs. So I don't see these high numbers that other boards are suggesting in terms of really breaking down what is the true cost of the additional cleaning and PPE that we need to put in place to assist our students and our staff.
If I can just add to that too, Superintendent Armstrong, our first approach is there's a lot of uncertainty moving into the fall, and we always look at our budget in the fall and revise based on what's known. So a lot of the uncertainty still exists moving into the fall, and we're uncertain what it may look like. So to try and put numbers to that's very difficult. We have put numbers to what is known, but what we don't know is we don't know what funding may be available. The ministry's announced that they have some PPFs available. They haven't announced board by board allocation yet, so we're uncertain what that might fund. We're uncertain what funding can be redirected to in the year to offset those additional costs. And that could be significant. If we hit a second wave and we're back to an online learning model, we may not need the level of PP&E that's in the budget right now, for instance, right? Or that's proposed. So that might be a reduced expense projection. And also I think over the years, in my experience here, I think we've been really fiscally responsible. We've been able to increase our operating surplus to $19.7 million. We've been able to pay off our capital deficit. And I think we've always, each year we've kind of said that was the rainy day fund. And we also haven't included in that $19.7 million the total impact that the 2019-20 year will have, which we expect, based on our analysis in the presentation, to add to that surplus. So you can see that there's some moving parts here, and it would be tough for us to go put COVID expenses in a model that doesn't consider COVID funding. That said, I think the priority, though, as we've stated, is the health and safety of students and staff, and I don't think any expenses will be spared to fully ensure that.
Thank you. Trustee Higginson, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this.
Trustee Higginson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, go ahead, Trustee Higginson. I am back, Trustee Cook.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It's quite sobering numbers, looking at all of these things and looking at all the possibilities and then having the huge asterisks on all of them that we just don't know. I'm going to shift a little bit here and just talk about, ask some questions about some of the technology numbers that we're looking at. I know the government has been clear that parents will have some choice on whether they send their children back to school or whether they keep them at home in a learning at home model. And we did a big tech rollout from our school-based resources, tech resources, out to families when we were doing emergency pandemic learning. And I see that we have gratefully, some funding to be able to both build up some of our tech resources and also replace some of the things that we may have needed to post-pandemic planning. So I guess my questions are around, I see we've purchased 2,000 laptops and 200 iPads. So along kind of with Trustee Sipcar's questions about where does this money come from, if we are going to be, later on today, we're going to be talking a lot about COVID recovery for lessening the gaps in literacy and numeracy, and a lot of those diagnostic programs are online based. So we're going to need school resources. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to supply our families who have chosen to learn at home with some sort of resources, but we're just not going to have a one-to-one, one student to one device ratio at this point in the budget and numbers that have been given to us from the province. So I guess my question is about how many devices how many devices are we short? And you may not be able to answer that. How many more devices do we need? Is it in the hundreds? Is it in the thousands? And do we need to advocate for more of that? And what are the budget implications of kind of some of those those questions between the learn at home model students and the in-class students that can't share devices and are going to be required to do more work in technology programs.
This is Superintendent Armstrong. Perhaps I might be able to refer part of your question to Superintendent Mills with respect to the technology devices.
Well, I'll start my answer with one of the questions. Do we need to advocate for more technology? The short answer, yes. We could always use more technology. What we've tried to do is procure as many as we can right now. Manufacturers are slow. So we've been able to procure about 1,300 devices. We're waiting for another additional 1,000. When all is said and done, we'll have about 4,200 devices available for our students. We did in our 4 phases before summer loan out just over 3,600 devices. So we will have those additional 4,200 devices to lend out. We'll be doing a process of requesting devices again in August for September. We're also preparing devices for our staff as well, so we need to make sure that our staff have devices as well, so we're doing that as well. But certainly we could use more. We'll be looking at what those numbers are for the request when they come in, and then we'll have to see what's available left for our schools. So, it's going to take a little bit of time to get those numbers. And then we'll start procuring what we need to for next year. And that's part of why in the budget presentation you saw to be determined our technology costs for next year.
Thank you. Is there a supplementary, Trustee Higginson?
Not at this time, thank you.
Thank you. I believe that I have Trustee Halberstadt next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, back to Superintendent Mills again. I know at one time, not too long ago, we were talking about how many devices per student, and I think John Howitt was in charge of that at that point, and I think he told me it was 4 to 1 was the benchmark we were looking at. What is it now? Do we have a ratio like that in place? And again, what is it now? And what is the ultimate goal? Is it 1 to 1? And how long would it take to get to something like that, or how much would it take?
Certainly 1 to 1 would be nice. One of the issues around that is it's not sustainable with the amount of funding that we receive for technology. Our numbers are a little bit skewed right now. We do look at about a 3 to 1 ratio in most of our schools. But because we've loaned out so much of our technology, there won't be a whole lot of technology that will be available in the schools at this point. Again, that will be determined once we know how many requests we have for home use here at the end of August and early September.
Okay, thank you. Just a supplementary on a bit of a different topic, but one thing that was concerning me was the estimation that we're going to lose international students, visa students. 139 are projected. Can somebody tell me how many we've had last year, and how many are we hoping to get this year? When will we know? I guess not until September for sure. But is it a major drop off? And if so, what kind of revenues are we going to be giving up? And maybe to look at some kind of an incentive program to bring these people back into the fold.
This is Superintendent Canty. Thank you, Trustee Halberstadt, for the question. So currently we are surveying our students to see who exactly is able to come back. We're looking at 164 students now. To put that in perspective, this past year we had just under 300. So it's a drop off, to say the least. Could be nearly 80 students. We do have to have those students quarantined for 14 days when they return. And so there's a program that MLI is putting together for us, and that will be up in Barrie. It's a 14-day program, and then the students will come to us. Then there's 2 periods they can do that, either starting on September 2nd to the 16th or September 18th to October 2nd. And again, we're just surveying the agents right now seeing when the students are coming back and trying to slot them into those periods so we can get them back. But as you said, Trustee Halberstadt, there will be a major decline, and I've been working with Sean Mayhew on that.
Okay, and have you, our tuition remains the same, is that right?
The tuition, actually, it's $450 increase, and that's to begin to incrementally cover the $1,300 government clawback, because that's money we were losing. That's something we planned before COVID happened, and it was in all of our documentation, so the agents were aware of that $450 increase.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Sartori?
Thank you. So I think I probably know the answer to my question. I had already given, some of the other conversations that have happened, but I did note from some articles in the media, and I'm sure as many others on this call have, that TDSB has put out some estimates of their costs depending on the model this fall. As including their potential PPE costs and requirements, cleaning costs and requirements, as well as some educational staff requirements. So, am I correct in understanding, based on the conversation tonight and where we are with the budget and our understanding of what our direction, I guess, from the ministry is going to be, that we're not anticipating requiring any more classroom staff in the fall that's specifically COVID related? Is that right?
This is Superintendent Armstrong. At this time, we don't anticipate any additional classroom staff. If students are cohorted, then teachers will be assigned to work with each cohort, and we're not aware at this time of any additional needs related to that.
If I could ask, with respect to cleaning staff, I do believe, this is Director Kelly,
yes,
that there would be additional costs, for example, because there would have to be cleaning in between classes. So there may be those kind of incurring costs for sure.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, my question, thank you. So I just had a supplemental question then as well. Does there was a reference to reclassification of staff earlier in the presentation to consultants, I believe was the reclassification. And did that have anything to do with COVID?
It's Sean Mayhew here. No, that did not have anything to do with COVID. That had to do with the movement of the program leadership allocation out of the school board administration grant into its own grant, and in that process, the funding flows through the consultant's line. And those program lead positions relate to an Indigenous lead, school effectiveness lead, early years lead, etc. So really, it's just a reclassification in the budget. Okay.
And then one more question that is, maybe getting ahead of the COVID reopening presentation that we're going to have later, but some of the been all over the place.
Okay, Trustee Sartori, I believe that your question got broken up.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello, can you not hear me?
I can now.
Okay, my question is where we are with, does this relate to staff, to where we are, I guess, in direction from the ministry around these references to 15 student classrooms.
Can you repeat the question, Trustee Sartori? I can't understand. I didn't hear.
Okay, so I've turned my camera off. Is that better?
Yes, actually, yeah.
Is that better? Okay.
So for hopefully the third time's a charm. So these references to 15 student classrooms that we're seeing, that hasn't been a direction that has formally come from the ministry yet, correct?
We did receive information about the 51 as a guideline. That would be when students are cohorted in, say, cohort A, cohort B.
Okay.
And so we have not received final direction from the ministry as of yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have lots of questions to getting our budget package, because I think that would be the best thing to do at this point. However, I'm referring to, I guess, page 14 and 15 in the slide deck. And my question is about how, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And my question is about how we traditionally take that snapshot of what our actual enrollment is twice a year. I think we call it reorg. And that snapshot is predicated on literally who's enrolled and who's in the building. However, I'm asking, is there a possibility if there are parents who, despite all our plans for safe and welcoming schools this fall, choose not to physically send their kids to school? And because their particular area, I live in Kingsville, Kingsville-Leamington area is, you know, quite different. Data is there, and there are some things that aren't showing up on the data. If there are hesitant parents and they say they want to keep their kids home and they're just going to homeschool, they're not actually going to enroll because they see something that, you know, they don't want to enroll, and they say they enroll in November, are we going to get funding for them? What are the reorg days? And do we need to, I don't know, do we need to politically advocate to maybe for the ministry to look at this school year and those snapshots as different? Because there will be, I predict, kids, students coming in, enrolled, not enrolled, engaged, then, you know, maybe in February saying, you know what, I'm going to come back for a victory lap next year. How will that impact us, that uncertainty and those kids not being there on reorg day? How will that impact us?
Trustee Burgess, I can answer that question. It's not called reorg day, just to be specific. That would be what I would call count days. October 31st and March 31st are the 2 days the ministry has snapshots where you send in counts, and that is what the funding is based on. So I think that's what you're referring to, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, and so those are the dates. I'm hoping, obviously, we would try to register all students, whether they choose to stay on an online learning program, but that would be run and registered through the board. We would encourage all students to continue with that. If students did families did choose homeschooling, of course, that would affect the revenues. But also we would be, our opportunity is to provide everything, the range of program that can make students fit their needs. And there would be particular dates wherein students could re-enter. They would be very specific, I think, just in terms of cohort planning. But even if a student, for example, is in one of the groups, we would make sure that they're registered, and then should they decide to return, they can return back from an online learning program, for example, to another program. In the long term, could people homeschooling affect the budget? It could. We hope that we'll be able to provide a program that would meet their needs. So you raise a good point.
Supplemental. I appreciate your hope, but I'm very concerned about this, because if on count day, it just happens to coincide with some, you know, some real strong apprehension, and it does affect us. I don't know how we can, you know, best advocate. So I'm just wondering, could you please consider that, and maybe when we do get the budget presented to us, give us some ideas on maybe even political advocacy. I don't know. I haven't seen it raised anywhere else in boards across the province. So is it best to suggest maybe to the ministry that we, have count days every month? I don't know what's in our best interest, but I'm afraid that we're going to be, of course, offering great programs and staffing, but the money's not going to flow. So thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, just before we move on to the next person in line, I'd like to remind everybody that the presentation was based on what we know now, and there's a lot of what ifs that we couldn't possibly have our administration answer right now. So this was more a briefing document, and so there's some understanding. So I just want to throw that out there. I have Trustee Cheen for the first time.
Oh, hi. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Can you hear me? Oh.
Yes.
Hi. Oh, my question has been asked to a certain degree, but I have listened to other school boards meetings, and seems they have more detailed planning about the pandemic, and for example, they have different plan for the for distance learning or face-to-face learning, and they have their planning about how they can register. And for the online learning, they do prepared synchronous learning, and they prepared a special teacher for that, extra teacher. So they do need extra staff for the next semester for the pandemic. But to me, I think it's a little bit a surprise that we can handle this without any extra staff. So I'm just wondering if we have had enough planning, detailed planning on that, and are we ready for the school, pandemic situation? Because from their presentation, I see that extra staff is necessary, and it's not a small amount compared with the computer, the laptop. That's nothing, but the extra staff do need a lot of money for funding for that. But we don't have that in budget. So I wonder if we have made enough planning for the coming semester.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Trustee Chin, we are still in the planning stages. We have done a lot of planning. We have certainly looked at that. We do know, for example, in the area of special education, we will be requiring, I think Superintendent Wilcox is in there. You've talked to me about a number, increased staffing there, and there is increased staffing with the cleaning. And depending, occasional teacher costs, of course, could be another additional cost depending on the model that we're using and the situation. So I do see there will be increased costs. I think what we're hearing here from the finance people is that because of our good surplus position and because of some advanced planning in terms of purchases for next year, that it has assisted us in planning, but there will be certainly some extra staff, yes. So be assured we're aware of that. And again, what model the ministry tells us, which should be soon, will certainly influence what our planning looks like. And again, we do have to be very prepared in the health and safety area in the area of PPE. And I do hope that the ministry does provide additional funding in that area because we know that will be required.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that has a question before we move on to the next item? Okay. I would like to move on to reports we received, item H1.
Hi, it's Director Kelly here through you, the chair. I'm pleased to present the report entitled COVID Recovery Plan on behalf of the Senior Administration and many others. This is a response to the motion of June 16th. The needs that it addresses are in the areas of literacy, numeracy, mental health, and well-being, with specific focus on special education and in the area of poverty. We also have recognized that this is an ongoing and flexible effort that we will need to consider as we move forward in this present context. You'll also note that we could be in various learning models, and we will providing information for our families on a reopening page, which I know I've sent a timeline to trustees, but also has been sent and put on our website. And also we've indicated within that report a communication plan for what we'll be doing with our families and our staff. So I'm pleased to present this report in as much detail, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, are there any questions on the report?
Oh,
Trustee Higginson?
Can I ask a question?
So please get into the queue, the chat queue, because that's how I'm managing the meeting. Trustee Higginson, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to administration, I'm not sure who this would actually go to. Thank you very much for putting this together. It's good to kind of see all the different programs that we have in the works, and I had some questions about how they kind of all fit together, and I've sent some of those to superintendents ahead of time, so I wanted to thank them for their detailed answers on those. They kind of helped me have a better understanding of how those things will fit together. We just heard in the budget presentation that there are two kind of buckets of money that that the province has said that they will be sending. One is for technology, one is for mental health supports. And then in the COVID recovery plan, starting on page 10, there's a wealth of information in here about mental health, which I'm grateful to my colleagues for including it in the motion so we can have it in this report, because I think it's going to be something that as has been indicated in this plan, and I think that we all probably know that our already large mental health requirements are going to be exponentially more when we're having a return to school, and what these kids have been through and these families have been through over the last few months. So we touched a little bit on in that last question there about budget implications. Are we looking at any additional CYWs, psychologists, behavior team, guidance counselors, SSTs, attendance counseling? Are we looking that there's going to be major budget implications? I'm looking at this huge matrix here of all of these necessities and wondering what the budget implications might be of having to bring in more additional supports for our students and their families.
I'm going to ask Mr. Mayhew if he could respond to this too, but we do have some additional staff in the budget, am I correct, in the area of mental health?
Superintendent Armstrong. Sorry, Mr. Mayhew just.
Okay, sorry.
I'm still here.
Oh, okay.
So yes, there is an additional. We've always said all along that Spec Ed is underfunded, and so we do direct non-enveloped GSN funding to support the needs in our special education students. And
I'm just thinking, Superintendent Armstrong, in the area of mental health specifically, I know that we are having an increase this year in the area of special education, and I teased Superintendent Wilcox about that, but I know he's committed to serving students, and we do have an increase of staff in that area. But in the area of psychology, social work, CYWs, I'm not sure if there's an increase in the number of staff. I know we are well equipped compared to other Ontario school boards in this area, and they are not, many of those positions are not funded staff. So I do feel we're rich in that area, and we do have some certainly program ideas with respect to that. And maybe Superintendent Pike could speak to this, because I know it's her area.
Thank you very much. What was written in the plan on page 10 is planning with the existing staff that we do have. So in the budget, there is no indication for additions to any of social workers for what we've got planned. So as for the CYWs and for psychologists, that's in a different portfolio, which is not necessarily dealing with what's written in this particular plan. Very well versed and very professional people we've got in the psychology department, but this is just to do with the social worker and attendance counselors.
I can share the staffing increases in the budget with respect to the educational support staff. As Superintendent Pike just mentioned, there still is if you recall, there's still the grant that supports the mental health positions. I believe we have 3.5 positions that are supported through that funding that was moved into the GSN this year. So that's still maintained. It's not an increase, but it's dedicated to mental health. However, if we're looking at educational support staff as a whole, we've added one speech language pathologist that was with student support funds. We've added 6.5 CYWs, that's with student support fund money. We've added 5 DSWs, that is 1 with student support fund and 4 with just regular student need. We've also added, I believe, a tier 3 support worker. And we've added a developmental management or behavioral social worker. We've also added 2 ABA coordinators that are with the Student Supports Fund monies as well. And also in the area of educational support, student support, we've added 2 support workers for the deaf and hard of hearing. So there's, we went through that today in SEAC. There's quite a few additions in that area to support student need.
Thank you. I just had one supplemental to that. I very much appreciate, thank you, Sean, for sticking around for that question that I kind of brought all the way back. So I'm wondering if when we get into, when we're hopefully, gratefully getting our kids back into the schools and getting them back connected with each other and connected with their teachers and the administrative staff, if we notice that there's an uptick in the need for that, are we able to access, I know we don't have the details on how much money we're getting out of that pot of money for mental health, but are we able to, have we kind of ballparked anything out of our reserves that we have to be able to quickly mobilize additional supports should we find that our students are struggling harder than we had kind of prepared for or anticipated?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we did see high needs, we would come to the board, obviously, for that support. We do, I think, have very competent, adequate staff, but should that be something that we see a rise on, then we would certainly bring that to the Board of Trustees for a budget approval. I know in the past, for example, in the area of special education, at times we've seen the needs are much higher than we had anticipated, and so sometimes we've come forward and asked for 10 additional educational assistants. So, you know, we do assess the needs and then would bring forward to the board any things that we see in that area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Cheen.
Oh, hi. You can hear me, right? And I read through the whole plan, and to be honest, I have a feeling that they are general plan, and there is no, detailed, doable, action that we are going to take based on the COVID-19 pandemic situation, and everything with. In the plan, we seldom mention that online teaching and how we can convey the knowledge to the students. For example, we generally say that students will have access to grade level instruction focused on all aspects of the Ontario language curriculum. Yes, it's easy to say that, but during the pandemic situation, how could you do that? And even the synchronous learning is kind of have a lot of a lot of teachers who are against of that, and how are you going to handle that? How are you going to, find a good way to convey the knowledge? And at the end of the communication strategy, it only shows that we use SB and we use phone to communicate. But the most important communication is to the knowledge. How can we convey the knowledge to the students? But we didn't mention that. So I see the whole overall impression is that we're really not ready for the pandemic situation, and it's just a general preparation as Euro years. You know what I mean?
I think there are, Trustee Chin, there are certainly plans below this. This is a high-level plan, and of course this has to be flexible, and we're working into the new year. But I'd like Superintendent Howitt perhaps could respond to this. You may have some ideas.
Certainly, thank you, Madam Director. Trustee Chin, thank you very much for your question. In this particular plan, it is speaking about good teaching and responding to student needs through good teaching. In terms of what you are referring to, we are presently in the process of developing what exactly it will look like for each model that may occur next year, whether it's a normal entry with all students, or it's an adapted model, or it's a remote model, with great specificity about what is expected of teachers and students during any one of those models, which we may have to pivot to at any moment. In this plan, it's talking about what do we need to do to respond to students. And yes, all students will have access to grade level material starting in the fall, regardless of the model. We talked about this in the spring when we were in the midst of the pandemic. Everything, we talked about that light switch going off, unexpected to everyone, and people did their very best to respond. However, we know better now, and moving into the fall, what's in this plan is it's talking about good teaching. Students will have access to the Ontario curriculum with all different content areas. It's asking for teachers to conduct diagnostic assessments to understand student readiness in moving forward with the curriculum expectations. And it's about, with that information, providing personalized instruction to students. That is good teaching. It's finding that what's referred to in the document, that zone of proximal development, knowing where the child is and a space to have them learn that it's reachable enough for them to achieve it. But in terms of what you're asking for, we're putting great detail into that plan. The entire senior team is talking about the details, anticipating commentary from the ministry and from the Premier as to what exactly that model will be. And we are going to be perfectly poised, and all of this has been, what we know to date has been consulted with various stakeholders, and we will continue to do that. So we're well prepared and transparent with everyone about what the expectations are. There's no excuse moving into the fall. We'll be ready for every situation.
Supplementary? Chair? Yeah, I understand that our purpose is to have good teaching, but how we can do that if we cannot, provide a correct method of communication? How can we, achieve those purposes? And in the previous several months, we have already experienced. And it's really not satisfactory communication. It's not the fault of our board. It's special situation for every board. What I mean is that how, for this special plan, how we are going to improve during this special situation. We are lack of face-to-face communication. We are lack of synchronous teaching. We are lack of instruction time. How can we achieve this? It's kind of just a good dream, beyond everything. And how can we achieve that?
If I may, Madam Director and Mr. Chair, may I respond?
Yes.
Okay. So, Trustee Chin, maybe I can be a little bit more explicit. And again, it was a pandemic, a moment that no one expected in March, and we did our best to respond, and we encouraged staff to be responsive, And we're really proud of the work that our staff did in the circumstances they were in. Knowing what we know now, there will be explicit expectations around communication, around synchronous learning, around asynchronous learning, about FaceTime, about communication with parents. Because we've been through it, we know, it could be A, B, or C, and we've done all this planning to make it happen. It's being laid out explicitly in a manual for our staff that we are earnestly working on right now. Again, we still have a couple of pieces of information that have not been confirmed, but we're preparing for each of those. And I think it responds to what you're asking for around specific direction with our staff who want to know what to do and want to achieve the very best for their students, knowing that they may need to pivot at any time. Everyone is poised and nervous about it. They want to do their best. We are aligning all of that information right now. I hope that better answers your question.
Yes, thank you for this clarification. And I do hope that we can contact other board, because I know how other board do, and they have much more detailed planning. And as for the synchronous learning, other board has already requested more than I made a motion last time. But in our board, we kind of get a lot of fight regarding that. But I'm just I worried that in the future, in the September when we started, we still fight with that without enough preparation. So if we cannot get a good judgment and good agreement with how we are going to communicate the knowledge, those goals will not be achieved. So that's a common sense for me. So I just hope, I appreciate your hard working. I just hope you can be more ready about it.
I'm sure once we get more information from the province this week, it'll probably help solidify where we're moving. Trustee Halberstadt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I will stick with Superintendent Howitt. And with everything else that's coming down upon us with the pandemic, all the changes, my question is with regard to the new math. Do we have the curriculum in our hands to start off in September? I guess that's question number one. I was looking through your documents today saying that real world connections for the new math, such as teaching a student how to budget for his or her first car. Are we going to be teaching that kind of stuff in September? And if not, when do you think it'll all be in our hands and we'll be able to roll it out in an efficient way?
Thank you for the question. And yes, the curriculum has been released. I've attended sessions about details for the curriculum, and so has central office staff. We're excited about the release of the curriculum. And we have offered professional development this summer about highlights for changes to the curriculum, which also includes a social emotional component in terms of learning and disposition around learning mathematics. And we will have, and we are in the process right now of developing professional development for the commencement of the school year, even before it starts, and the professional development days for our elementary staff of the revised curriculum from grade 1 to 8. So all staff will have professional development prior to school starting. Staff have engaged by choice this summer who have wanted to do that in the professional development session. And we're well poised to roll out the curriculum and support our teachers with implementation for September of 2021 or 2020. Sorry, I'm a year ahead.
Okay, just a supplementary, similar kind of a question with regard to implementing something new, and that would be the high school de-streaming. Where is that going to be coming on board again in a month or so? And if not, when would we be embracing that and starting to go in that direction?
It's Director Kelly, through you, the chair. Trustee Halberstadt, that's a really big change. That's a really big question. And that would be, my understanding is for the following year in the math area of mathematics. And so we'll begin looking at that as soon as we get information. Again, we have not that much detail on it, but again, that's something that will be implemented in a, I believe, a gradual way starting next September, the following September.
And that would be math, and then what else? Literacy too, or?
The initial thing that I've heard is that it's mathematics first, and then they would add other subjects, but the specificity of that I'm not aware of. Unless Superintendent Howard is, I'm not aware what other courses.
No, I am not. Perhaps Superintendent Canty has heard something different.
Only the math in 2021, and we've heard no other direction after that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Sipcar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'd like to ask a couple questions on the last section, which I believe is the students in poverty section. I'm just trying to find out where the title is now. I'm actually going to ask a question on the very last point, which is the target or goal of addressing purposeful ways to address the opportunities we provide for school-based family involvement are as accessible to low-income families as they are to wealthier families. And I note that this point, and actually this entire section, it was really great, and in terms of outlining some of our goals, because I don't think I've seen a document like this since I've been on the board. There's probably been one before, but I haven't seen one like this since I've been on. And so I was curious if anyone could elaborate a little bit more on that specific point. And the reason why I'm asking for a bit of elaboration is because what comes to mind is, for example, parent councils who are able to mobilize a lot more and advocate or fundraise. I know that there's a discrepancy from school to school, or there can be. And I wonder about, is that what this kind of point speaks to? And what is, it says Paul Gorski's work to lead our thinking. And I just would love a little bit more on this point.
I believe Superintendent Pike could speak to this. I believe we had a conversation about this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Paul Gorski's work is something that we've been examining for a while. As you know, the books is 2013, and we had a system committee, about maybe 4 years ago. And we had principals, teachers, vice principals, union folks all together to talk about work and where we would move forward. And then we had heard that the ministry was going to be putting out a document, so we paused our work, but it's still paused. We have seen no document. I'm sure they've got other things at this point to be working on, but we wanted to have a resurgence of that committee so that we can really dig into these particular items, especially since COVID's come forward and we're noticing many items, many things, and many ideas that we need to shift and change our thinking on as schools. So when we talk about Paul Gorski's work, certainly there's lots of information out there. He's a really leading thinker when it comes to working with low-income families, as his life experience and, of course, his research pieces and leading his students at his university. But we wanted to really get down to these specific things. We had this as a goal in our board improvement plan, I think it was about 4 years ago, and it was we thought it was very specific until we started getting into the work and found it to be too large. And so we brought it back, and now we're going to be really specific about these particular things. When you ask the question specifically about parent councils and such, I'm sure that will be part of it as we work through it, but it's really early to tell on what that's going to look like, but we do want to have a plan fairly soon.
And just a supplemental, if I can. So I guess kind of, I think it's a couple points ahead when it talks about the student nutrition programs. And I made note that it's going to be kind of more of a, I think it says grab and go model somewhere I saw. I'm trying to read where I saw that, but it also says consulting with community partners on funding for the Ontario Student Nutrition Program. I know they have some funding there. how close are we working with them for the fall, and I guess how much planning have we done in this respect? Because it's not too detailed here.
It's Superintendent Pike. I can answer that particular question as well. We work really closely with all of our funders and all of our folks that do contribute to our student nutrition programming. And we're holding off until we know the direction of the Ministry of Education is going to take for schooling before we get really into the nuts and bolts. However, we do know from one of the documents coming from the Ministry of Education that they've pointed out a grab and go type of system. We've got a flurry of different nutrition programs in our system. We've got breakfast and we have snack and we have hybrid models of those that go through. Some have volunteers that go to a church and they prepare full warm breakfasts every day. And then we have others that are in the school, which are more of a grab and go kind of concept. So we are waiting first to find out what we're going to be happening. And then we're meeting to discuss what that's going to look like. And then what is the funding going to look like? Our funders, when it was during COVID, maintained our funding. They did not pull it back. Very gracious for that, or grateful for that. We actually did donate it to our community. I'm trying to remember which one it was, but the community food bank, the Unemployed Help Center was coming out of there, which services 15 different food banks. So the money that we would have put towards children's food and either breakfast programs or snack programs was put to the community. So we were thankful we were able to redirect that funding to that. And that's why we're kind of silent right now on what that's going to look like until we know what school does look like in September.
Thank you. Trustee Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to say that I like parts of the recovery plan, but then there's parts of it that I don't find it as a recovery plan. It seems to me, and no disrespect on it, and I know that that there was, you know, everybody, the senior staff has been working very hard, but there's parts of it to me that seem more of a cut and paste from a regular school year and moving into being in a pandemic, moving forward to a recovery. There has to be more, in my opinion, more specifics regarding what to do in a pandemic, recovering from a pandemic. There's like, you're talking in mental health about doing CBT groups. There's talking about additional supports to teachers, which I totally agree with. I think teachers are going to need additional supports. But as it was spoken to earlier about the additional supports, they're not clinical. They're not clinical staff, so they're not going to be able to help out in mental health crises if students' families are experiencing that. My question is, I mean, I have lots of questions, but due to time, I'm just going to ask one question. Is this report, when it comes back next time, is it going to be tightened up with more specifics in terms of other things like community resources? You talk about that a lot. Specific community resources, specific assessments, and like, I mean, there's stuff in here with mental health that kids are going to receive A, B, or C, but when? You know, and we have some fantastic social workers working for the board. I know many of them. But the thing is that on a good year, they have a difficult time meeting all the needs of students and families. This is not a regular year. So I'm just wondering, moving forward, can we get more specific and maybe look at even the mental health piece a little bit more? And do we have other staff that are qualified to do mental health work with students and families?
Thank you for the question, Trustee Cook. You said a lot of information there. Yes, it was our intent to update people, the trustees. Of course, the role is governance, and so the real fine details would be the work of staff, but certainly we could provide more details in terms of specificity of programming. Do we have the staff? We have, I believe, a fairly robust staff compared to Ontario school boards in the area of mental health, but Superintendent Pike, you may want to add more detail about that. When we assess the needs and when we see that there may be other things, as I mentioned, we may be coming back to the board. We're going to have to be pretty nimble, flexible, and responsive during this time because there's so much we don't know.
Thank you. It's Superintendent Pike. You're right. There are going to be a lot of needs come September, especially for students with anxiety and worries about coming to school and having to be able to their level of stress and whatever capacity that looks like. The Ministry of Education has just promised us some resources coming from Mental Health Ontario. And I'm actually on one of the provincial writing teams as well as our head psychologist. We are really focusing a lot of effort on Tier 1, which is for all students, not just for students that are in Tier 2 or 3, which require mental health clinicians. So we're looking at socio-emotional literacy, which I know that Superintendent Howitt just mentioned it's part of the new math curriculum, and really expanding the role of teachers and how they're going to embed some of this in different subjects, but also starting the day with specific self-regulation strategies or socio-emotional strategies, whatever it is, so that they can set the tone. We have to have a very safe and inclusive environment for all of our students to come back into, as some of them are going to be reluctant and a little bit worried about what goes on at school. So while you're speaking specifically about clinicians, and the mental health plan, or this plan here does note about CBT, those are new things. The group, we have been doing CBT for years, but we are doing group ones, which is something new for us based on COVID and based on how we've got technology to do this. So it looks a little bit different. But you're right, there's not very much specifics because we are waiting for some of the modules to come from the ministry on what that looks like. We do have other specific plans, but we have to wait to see what's coming from them. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I just, I know I said I wasn't going to continue, but can I have a supplemental, please?
Yes.
Thank you. So just quickly, I just want to say, like, when you're saying, like, there's going to be, I know there's anxiety, there's going to be stress. What I'm hearing, though, is I'm going to speak on behalf of the teachers. I think that a lot of, we're putting a lot on our teachers, not just to teach, but to also do the mental health piece in many cases. And I don't think, my opinion, I don't think that's fair. Because we're going to have a lot of staff coming back also that are going to be reluctant, anxious, and stressed out. And for them to be able to, hide that and then work with kids that are feeling that, I mean, that's a lot. And that's one of my concerns, is that some of our staff, they're going to get burned out very quickly. And I think that's something that we need to think about, is support for our staff also. Thank you.
And if I can continue with that, because I certainly hear what you're saying. It is a very concern for all of us, what that looks like. In our first PA day, we are dedicating some time specifically for mental health supports, and as well as Superintendent Houston and the GEEP counselors are also working on things too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Trustee Sartori.
Sorry, I had said you can go to Julia now, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this large report. I have questions like everybody else, and I'll try to restrict them. So I read the whole thing, and I noticed that on the last page of the memo, it says we are committed to ensuring effective communication with our communities as we reopen. This will be essential to ensuring that students and our families are partners in the educational journey. It's my observation, and I think my colleagues will agree, that parents and guardians and caregivers have never been so actively engaged in daily work with their students as they were during March, April, May, and June. And they had a real spectrum of feelings about how they accomplished, being partners. Some of them felt pretty good, and some of them felt they were complete dismal failures. And I'm looking in the communication strategy, and I'm looking in the pandemic, the whole plan. And my question is, how exactly are we going to help parents become better tutors? How are we going to help parents and guardians and caregivers be more prepared and able to support their learners? And will we have somebody who's sort of like a central parent help desk, where there's a dedicated person or something that can help field some of these things, so that they can be key partners in their students' motivation, because it's a real concern. Parents are still overwhelmed. They are overwhelmed. So even with, I anticipate, I live in Kingsville. We have a high apprehension about safe return to school buildings, because we know the level of contagion in our area. And so how are we going to help? Who's going to be the lead on this adult education / parenting / tutor support?
Thank you for your question. We certainly understand the parents' anxiety. I think we're all feeling that as well. So I know Superintendent Hillman, you might have some comments on this. I know. Are you there?
Thank you, Director Kelly. I'm happy to address that. Yeah, so certainly you and I have talked about the complexity of the parent response and how this has affected so many of our families so differently. We're getting our kids back in September. So, we have two different scenarios to examine, one of which is a scenario where our students are back at school, possibly for some time, where they will have a direct connection again with their teachers, with their principals. In that format, the teacher and principal will be, as they've been in the past, the best connection on what did yesterday's assignment mean? What do you need me to do at home with the activity you gave us today? So in a model, an adopted model where students are in school for part of the time, which we think is certainly possible, and we think many of our families will participate in. I mean, we're going to have the school-based supports close at hand. So that's going to be significantly different than the reality many parents faced in the spring. We will have families who are choosing to not send their students and participate in our adapted learning model. They will have the support of an online program from the Greater Essex County District School Board that will have synchronous and asynchronous support from teachers. So that will be built into the program in terms of who the parent can speak to, specifically the teacher that's leading that program, and answer those kinds of questions. So I think the strength of the model moving forward is that we've been able to re-engage families with the school, where the specific teacher that is responsible for that program and the specific supports, be that the vice principal or CYW, are back in the game and can provide the best support for that. We will certainly be providing direction and communication along those lines, but we will be in a significantly different place in September than parents found themselves in March and April.
A supplemental, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I wish I shared that. I think district-wide, I share that optimism. But I live in Kingsville. And so my question, in a more pointed regard, I'm looking at page 16, and it's in the Students of Poverty section, but the supports professional development we have here along the lines of we're going to be engaging, what is it, students and families able to access goods and services, etc. It says Windsor Goodfellows, Revenue Canada, individuals, and various church groups. So my specific question is in a particular disengaged, kind of group of parents. I don't see anything in the communication strategy. I don't see any recognition of something that isn't online. So how are we going to engage with, for example, our Low German Mennonite community? And how have we asked elders in the Mennonite Central Committee and our Swiss workers and folks that are well regarded in the community on how to engage those folks who have barriers to this kind of document, and they have barriers to culture and trust, and certainly any kind of virtual learning. They're not covered in this document. So how are we going to reach out? It says various church groups. What else other than online and social media can we offer these folks, other than a website?
If I may continue.
Yes.
I spoke with public relations officer today in terms of the specific contacts we're making in Leamington. So our Swiss workers have already committed to doing this work with us and with our families. We've spoken in terms of identifying translators, etc., for our school messenger communications and other document communications with many of our groups, but specifically with our Low German group. We will continue to work through the principals of those schools who have those contacts and use those mechanisms. And in our COVID strategy committee that's had our first meeting, we've identified the use of community resources, community organizations, examples specifically including churches in Leamington as an area that we want to explore. We have 2 meetings, and as we've shared on the final page of the document you have in front of you, we've committed to adding any of those specifics to complement the work that we're already doing. So the question will be, what could the learning program look like? If they are looking for printed packages versus online material, that's a slightly different question than our communication with them. But we're confident that we have good relationships with the people in that community in terms of sharing that, and we'll work with, with parents and teachers and the principals of those areas as we get information from the government about what the model will look like specifically in that area, and be very open to the process of asking them what they need and ensuring that we work towards that.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Olmsted.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, Julie and I are on the same wavelength tonight, being as we both live in the Kingsville, Leamington area, and we are facing similar issues. I have a list of questions that were just, a lot of them were touched on in that last series of questions from Trustee Burgess, and the answers provided by the senior staff. One quick follow-up from that before I go to my question. Have you spoken with the church leaders in the community, in particular the Low German community? Much information is passed from the pulpit, and I think it would be very beneficial for us as a board to reach into the churches and develop communication and strong relationships, because that community is being affected right now by this virus, and I think they need to understand we are a partnership. When we open schools, we want their children to be as safe as possible. We want them to be as safe as possible. And I think to get the information to them, the best way is through someone that they trust, and that would be someone within their church. So I would really advise looking into the churches and speaking with some of the elders and pastors in the churches. And I think that would be our best mode of communication from what I know. And I appreciate the work you've done, and I know that they have appreciated the telephone calls in Low German that have been sent out. I think that would be a really beneficial thing to continue to pass on our information. It has been appreciated. I have heard from many families, so please keep that up, and please, if you can, look into developing those relationships with the elders and the pastors. As for my question, on the very last page about communication strategy, it says that we are going to engage with families in a questionnaire through the board website and link through EDSB to determine if their children are returning to school in the fall. I realize we did a survey in late June and beginning of July, but to me, honestly, that feels as though it was about 5 years ago in terms of how this has evolved in this particular area. I was wondering if we are going to maybe re-ask some of the similar questions about parents returning to school. I know a lot of issues have changed and there's a lot more anxiety, particularly in this area. And I think you'd be surprised by some of the responses that you might hear now. And I was wondering how we are going to reach out aside from this, aside from a questionnaire on the website. Is our aim to speak with every family in the Greater Essex County District School Board to see so that we have a real idea of who's going to be coming to school? Because I don't think that parents know right now. I think it's changing every single day. So do we have a date in mind, and is our aim to actually speak to everyone? Are we going to have principals and teachers calling? Do you need us to call? I mean, I think we really need to communicate with everyone here. And have a real idea of what our families are facing, because I think we'd all be very surprised by the answers in the survey if that were to be given out now.
Through the chair, thank you, Trustee Olmsted, for the question. Yes, of course, this would be one way. We know that EDSB is a way that we communicate with families a lot, but we would be doing follow-up with individual calls. Should that not be a way to reach people? Of course, there would be a series of ways that we would do that. Wouldn't be just a one. This is one way that we could reach people, but of course, we want to make that personal communication, and we know some of our families would not be engaging that way, so we're well aware of that. With respect to following up survey is something we have considered. We did extensive surveys with our community. We probably had the biggest return of any board I know, and also with our teachers and our staff. That is something we will consider right now. We want to get a sense of the timing of something like that and where it would have the most meaning. Maybe we'll think about that in terms of where we would have the most impact and really getting voice. From people, because we did a very extensive survey. So that's something we will consider. We don't want to be asking, I know some of the other boards have asked, not to be critical, but maybe surface level questions. And I think we have a very robust response in the 15,000. Again, it has changed. So we will certainly find a way to find out how people are feeling. I'm just not sure that the survey, it was our plan to do a survey of that type, but Superintendent Hillman, you look like you've got your mic off. Maybe you have an idea.
Well, I just wanted to clarify what that is. So I thanks for the opportunity, Trustee Olmsted. So the words questionnaire, and we've worked through a couple different descriptors of that, but we will be asking for every family, for every child, once we have a clarity around our model. So it won't be, for the next short while, but we would certainly hope by August that we're in a position to say that the model we will be employing in our board is, and be able to describe it and ask parents to determine if they will be attending given that model or not. We are looking for an opportunity to gather some information for daycare partners as well, whether they believe a latchkey is required or not, and then that would be sent out. So yes, technically it's sent through EDSB in the web page, but EDSB would allow us to populate that so it could be sent directly to each parent, populated for their students. That we hope would get many, many results. Those who don't follow that, we will have a copy of that on our website. We will be using our general social media blitz and media partners to get that out. And then we will be in a scenario where we would be calling a school or notifying a school that you have 37 families who have not responded, and then asking those families to respond. So that information about what they're feeling at that time will be important for us. It's important that we communicate that after we can share the model. So that'll be the nature of this communication, and we will follow through in the variety of ways. And there may be some people who need this on a piece of paper to check which one, but our goal is to gather that from our families so that we're better positioned as we move into the September reopening of knowing who we think will be there and who won't.
Thank you. Supplementary, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So The question, the information that you were just speaking of is to determine if students will be returning in the fall. I have received a couple emails from parents who right now they say that they want to send their children back, and if asked today, they would say yes. Is there a date in mind? Like if they decide in particular, and again, it's Leamington families, so things are changing daily, it's fluid. If they decide on, you know, Labor Day, a family who said no, but then decided to send their children to school, would they be able to change their mind that close in terms of planning? Like people are just so unsure. They don't want to make the wrong decision and jeopardize their child's opportunity of going to school, but at the same time, they want to be cautious because the situation is so difficult and uncertain down here right now. So is there a date? Like, will parents be able to potentially change their mind during the month of August as things play out, and not put us or put you in a really tough spot in terms of planning?
I'm happy to start, and Director Kelly or Superintendent Mills, if you'd like to add. We are planning for all students to return. We've set up our classes knowing our students. You know, so plan A for us is that is our plan. We know that some of those families won't. Once we're clear that the model we have chosen and is approved by the ministry, once we're clear what that is, we're going to communicate with our families about that model and ask them that question at that time. That is not a binding contract that we would send in August, but it is an opportunity for us to have a better sense of where our families situate. There are significant challenges about families, you know, when they change their minds. So the intent would be if I thought on August 12th that I wasn't going to go, and on August 17th, we really feel better about it. I mean, we're planning for your children to be there. A concern we have is not having a scenario where children are fluid, right? Where they're starting in one place and then stopping and then asking if they can come back. So there are some challenges around that. But the intent of this questionnaire is to get a better understanding closer. So a quick answer to your question, it would not be a binding scenario if a person said in the questionnaire one thing and new information came up in their family and they changed their decision prior to the start of school.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Student Trustee Jane.
Through the chair, I really want to first say that I really appreciate all the work that was put into this plan, and I think there's a lot of really good things about the plan. I have a few questions. I'm going to try to keep it short. So within the mental health and well-being section, I noticed there's a section that talks about providing voice to students who identify as African, Black, and Caribbean. And I think later on in that same mental health and well-being section, under the reduce the stress and worry about transitioning to secondary school or post-secondary, under the outcomes, there's a reference to the student voice publication that's referenced in the same African, Black, and Caribbean point that I referred to first. And it speaks about an anti-Black racism report. So I have a few questions about this. Firstly, is this anti-Black racism report related to the motion that was passed at the last meeting? And also, with the student voice publication, I have some questions about how will all students be included in this publication, because when we were kind of in the peak of the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of protesting happening, a lot of the students who I spoke to, who identified maybe as African, Black, and Caribbean, didn't really feel like their voice, they had a platform to share their voice, or their voices were heard in encounters where maybe they felt like they were treated in a racialized way. So I'm just wondering, how are we going to ensure that every African, Black, and Caribbean student's voice is heard? And yeah, just start with that.
Thank you, Trustee Jane. I'm Superintendent Pike. I know has done some work in this area, and I'm sure she could respond to that through the chair.
Thank you, Superintendent Pike. The actual publication is currently being developed. We have an African, Black, and Caribbean coach, as well as a Change Your Future counselor who is working this summer. They have put together a flyer which went virtual, and I can certainly send that to you so that you can promote that with your own friends. They have put together, the two adults have put together questions based on a weekly conversation that they have with students that are currently in the Change Your Future program or associated with the ABC coach. So it is open to any student who wants to learn more or wants to provide voice to questions or provide questions to us so that we're able to make a really good publication representing all voices. So I can certainly send that to you. And if you would like to use your social media as well to get that out there, we would be really appreciative. We did go to the Black Educators Network as well. And that in that particular, there's 2 Black Educator Networks, but the main one, we did ask of all of our partners to send out the flyer to see if we can reach as many students as we could that go to GECDSB. Thank you.
A supplementary, Mr. Chair, if you will.
Yes.
So yeah, I would really appreciate it if you could send that to me, and if you could even send it to the incoming student trustees if you're still accepting responses, because they could also help circulate it. And also, if things like this in the future could be sent to the student trustees to be circulated to student senate, because I know the student councils of each school usually have a pretty good engagement with their student body. And especially for something like this, where we're trying to get as much student voice as possible, it would be really amazing to be able to use our student councils and promote it and get the student voice that we want in this publication. Now, I know that in Trustee Sipcar's motion last month, we didn't just discuss Black students. We also discussed Indigenous students, and I know that they also struggle in a unique way with their mental health and well-being, and also need avenues to share their voice. So why did we only choose to include African, Black, and Caribbean students in this, as opposed to also including our Indigenous students?
It's Superintendent Pike again. Certainly was not to disclude anyone. We had just made a commitment that we were going to look at our ABC students so that they're able to have their voices heard. So that was not intended at all to not include them. However, with the ABC coach that we have the privilege of having for a semester, which we are one of 6 boards to get, as well as our Change Your Future counselors and the students that they worked with, they decided to work with their population first. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Hatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, I just need to say a few things. So never before in the 30 years that I've been sitting in this boardroom has absolutely every aspect of our education system been so absolutely overwhelming. The questions have been directed at administration tonight that nobody has the answers to. I appreciate the COVID recovery plan for what it is. It's a starting document, and I appreciate all the effort that went into it. But absolutely everything, this recovery plan, the budget, trying to open our schools in September, the extraordinary amount of anxiety, pressure, so many unknowns, and of course, daily changes in circumstances that are totally beyond our control. And that's at every level, parents and staff and students. And I'm finding it all completely overwhelming. And so my question is this: I haven't heard anything about what we're doing to support our senior staff. Usually they do get some personal time in the summer that they really need after a regular school year, never mind what's been going on with COVID. And I'm really concerned about how we're reaching out and supporting our senior staff, because all I've heard is we just place one burden after another on them to try and get answers to questions that nobody knows the answers to. and the amount of their workload has been phenomenal over this past summer. So how are we supporting them? Is this all on the director's shoulders, or do we have some responsibility here? I don't even know if there's an answer to that question, but I'm going to ask it.
Director Kelly, do you have an answer to the question about senior staff?
Well, we are committed to the organization, and we will not get a break this summer. We have been nonstop. That is true. So thank you for that support, Trustee Hadfield. But of course, we will rise to the occasion, and we will continue to do. But like many of you too, it's very challenging times. But we will shoulder on, and we will be do our very best in support of Greater Essex County District School Board.
Yep. I have no doubt that that's what's happening. Thank you so much.
So I'd like to point out at this point that presentations, our bylaw allows for 15 minutes worth of questions. We're now on to 45 minutes worth of questions. So I think every trustee's had an opportunity to ask a question. So I'd like to move on to trustee question period. Are there any questions for trustee question period? Trustee Chin.
Oh, thank you, Chair. And my question is that I know that Massey Public School is going to have a semester schedule next year for the sake of the COVID-19 situation. And I want to make it clear that because I got information from parents, they ask after this year in 2021 school year, will the original full year is that module flex system coming back next year?
This is Superintendent Pike. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought your question was finished.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
It's Superintendent Pike through the chair. The plan is just to have a semester, as you said, for Massey for next year, for 2020-21. It is our full intention to continue the schedule of full year and semester courses for 21-22. Providing that we do not have to worry about any kind of public health requirements and that the COVID pandemic has been resolved. But is our full intention that it will resume next year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next is Trustee Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder, in the beginning of June, we had a, in the middle of whatever, we had a questionnaire that was circulated to the Kingsville family of schools, encouraging parents to and community members to respond regarding what they wanted to see in the new building on the South Shore located in Kingsville that represents the consolidation of 6 public schools. That's been out since the beginning of June. I'm wondering if anybody can give us a public update on what those consultations brought, where we are in the scheme of things regarding the design, when we can expect a more robust, thing with blueprints, etc. And are we going to get the school that we thought we were going to get when all the parks were underway? And is the funding enough now that it's 4 years old?
Is Superintendent Allwender ready there to respond? Superintendent Allwender? Okay, he's not there.
He is there. I think he's trying to unmute his phone.
Okay, sorry. I know I got kicked out a couple times too during the meeting.
Yes, he's had to connect on his phone. So.
Is there somebody else that can answer?
Superintendent Armstrong may be able to begin to start the answer.
If our manager of facility services is on the line, and perhaps she could answer.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's Juliana Hinchliff on the phone. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Thank you for that question, Trustee Burgess. We've been rigorously meeting for the last part of June, virtually with most of the key members of the staff at the school. They've provided an amazing amount of input into our design, and we've taken that information and done our best to implement it into the program. The program that you saw in the space template that was approved, I'm going to guess over a year ago, which designed or which formulated the programming for the school, i.e. how many classrooms, how many tech shops, what kind of tech shops, all those program bits and pieces have all been implemented into the school. None of those have been removed or changed from the initial space template. We've gone out just now for our initial cost estimate, which is due in a couple of weeks, which will then formulate the decisions going forward. One of the things that we did is that we used some of our previous cost estimates from our various other schools to inform the architect on what we would expect the cost estimate to come in, which is about $210 a square foot, where right now we're funded at about $185 a square foot. Because of the enormous size of this school, it is one of the biggest schools that we've built. We've been able to find economies of scale and efficiencies so that the program that was approved in the space template will be provided depending if the cost estimate comes in. And I see no indications right now that the cost estimate will not be in line because we've done our due diligence beforehand. There are some asks by some of the school staff that aren't in line right now with some of the philosophies that we've been building new schools at, but it will be no less than the quality we provided at Leamington High School at a minimum. So hopefully that answers your question. We're in design development right now. We intend to issue tender in March of next year, and hopefully construction to start soon after that. You'll see full designs probably before Christmas, where we'll be coming to the board with approval of the drawings and budget. So hopefully that answers the question.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, thank you very much for that update. And I heard the input from staff. I didn't hear anything about the collation of the survey or whatever, and I didn't hear anything about input from school councils or the general community or students, but I'm assuming that's going to be in the loop there somewhere. I just would like clarification about the difference between the $185 a square foot versus $210. So are you saying that it was originally budgeted, it was, originally $44 million, that's with, all of it in the daycare, the whole thing, that we're now trying to make the economies of scale and find the efficiencies, et cetera, and that the difference in that cost per square foot is going to come out of the design somehow?
No, we've done this at every school since the last 5 years. Construction costs have been very aggressive and very high. The ministry looks at boards to build schools within budget. So one of the last places that we look for cost saving is in program. We look at all sorts of other things, which are all related to the building design before we look at program. Program is one of the last things we look at. and we never touch program or program spaces if we can avoid it. But there are things like the type of floor we use, the type of walls we build, the type of roof we have, whether we have a mechanical room or whether the mechanical systems are on the roof. We've had to make some significant adjustments just because of the way the construction industry is going now, since even Begley, which was the first school I built quite a few years ago now. So it's not unusual, and it's certainly not, it's not something out of the ordinary for us. And like I said, Leamington was exactly built that way. And when you look at that school, I doubt you'd see any kind of issues with the design or the quality of the building.
Thank you. Trustee Higginson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you to someone administration. In the report on the recovery plan that we got today, there's a lot of community organizations. We're super grateful for all the community organizations that work with us. When are they going to get details on what they need to know as far as their own kind of COVID planning and information that they may need to know if they're going to be entering our schools and interacting within our buildings? When can they kind of expect to hear information that they may need to know?
I guess I can answer that question. I'm not really sure what it means, to be honest. So you're saying people who would be entering the building, Trustee Higginson?
Yeah, any of the community organizations that we currently work with who come into our schools and help with our students in schools right now, they're probably going to have other protocols and things that they're going to need to have in place. And I'm wondering when, and like things to do with cohorting and stuff. I know that those questions can't be answered at this point, but if we can give them kind of a timeline on when they can expect to hear information that they will need to know in their own planning to be able to accommodate coming into our schools and helping with our kids.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we'd be communicating with any agencies, for example, that come into our school. We would probably be doing that later in August. I couldn't really predict that at this time based on we would be following public health protocols, and it would depend on the kind of group and situation, but that is something we'll consider. Yeah, good question. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Jane.
Thank you. So I know that previously in the meeting we mentioned a need to acquire technology pieces and kind of having like a bit of a shortage. So I was wondering if we had either reached out to community partners or were considering to reach out to our members of our community and see if we could gather any kind of outdated, or not outdated, but a lot of times, like when companies will upgrade their systems or upgrade their technology, and they'll end up with technology that is still very functional, but just not useful to them anymore. So I was wondering if we had any plans to either come up with a system where we could take some of that technology in, update it a little or refurbish it a little, and then redistribute it to our students.
Director Kelly, I wonder if Superintendent Mills could answer that. I do know that we have issues around refurbished equipment, and so I know that you've done some thinking about that. If you don't mind answering that.
Sure, that's not a problem at all. It is more cost effective for us to buy new. I know in the past what has happened is we have taken some older equipment and it becomes quite costly to maintain. So we would rather spend a little bit more money for new equipment that is less maintenance, more warranty, I should say under warranty, and we have less issues with. So it really comes down to that.
Thank you. May I ask another question, or do I have to wait till round two?
There's only one round, and if it's not a supplementary to that question, we'll move on.
Okay, then.
Trustee Olmsted.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I know I had asked for some clarification in previous meetings, but has there been any plans made for our students whose pathway is experiential learning? So our co-op, specialist high skills major, OYAP, like the skills and trades pathways. like what measures will be taken to ensure the safety of our staff and students who leave the buildings to achieve their learning? Like, I know staff has to visit students at their work sites for co-op placements, etc. So what measures will be put in place to guarantee the safety of our staff, our teachers who go into those workplaces? And will those programs even run? Because how can we guarantee the safety of like a co-op student who's in a workplace for half a day and then moves into our school? It just seems to be a lot of danger signals, red flags going up. So I just was wondering if those programs will be offered for our students, and the safety, if you've thought, I know there's a lot going on, but have you thought of that and what safety protocols we put in place for both our staff and our students?
Through the chair, yes, we have thought of that. I'm going to ask Superintendent Canty to speak to that. I think there are a number of factors to consider in that, but there was certainly be some attempt to keep cooperative education. And I know we did some this summer, so if Superintendent Canty could speak to that.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Director Kelly. And you're correct. We were able to have our summer co-ops run, and that was by having Tim Lozon, our health and safety representative, create safety plans, and the businesses themselves, the institution had to have their own COVID safety plans that were cleared by the health unit. And so once that was in place, we were able to put our students into those positions this summer, and we intend to do the same in the fall. The co-op and specialist high school major and CHISM programs will be running. Some of the items, certifications will have to run virtually. However, we do intend, with all safety precautions in place, to be able to run our programs.
Supplementary to that, so will those students be able to then return to school if they're in a workplace for part of the day, and then if they have classes like for high school, they might be only in co-op for the morning or the afternoon, and then they come back into the school to continue on? Like, will that be allowed, or is that mixing too many cohorts of people together to keep the bubble safe, I guess?
Well, again, safety is going to be the number one priority. We're going to try to keep people safe. However, there is going to be situations where students do, as you said, travel to their workplaces and then return to the school in the afternoon or in the morning, depending. Of course, we'll be doing contact tracing. We'll be keeping our students safe with the cohorting, and however we can follow all of the health and safety guidelines by the health unit.
And if the staff is uncomfortable going into those workplaces, will there be something like an online inspection of the facilities? I just know it's a lot of our kids do co-op in like greenhouse settings, and with COVID numbers so high in the agro sector, is that the possibility where we would not send our staff into a building if they're uncomfortable? I just know what co-op teachers do, and when we're working with SAL students and the workers that go in to ensure the student safety, but I'm also concerned about their safety.
Yeah, yes, and as are we, and we certainly wouldn't send any staff into an area where we would send our students. And so again, we know that there are going to be students that choose, or parents that choose not to send their students. There are going to be staff that are unable to report to work as well, and we'll have to work around those issues as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It won't be too long. First of all, I'd just like to address one thing, Mr. Chair, through you, that comments were made and directed at our trustees regarding questions to our senior staff. I'd like to say that I respect all senior staff, as do the other trustees. But this is a pandemic. This is a different year. And yes, we do have questions, and we should be able to ask those questions without being lectured from another trustee saying that we shouldn't ask those questions. And I'm sorry that senior staff doesn't get time off, but there's many, many other organizations throughout the whole world that do not get time off because of this pandemic and planning moving forward. With that being said, it's the families who don't answer the survey that we are concerned about. It's the students who are unable to participate in e-learning, lost their connection at school, don't have their safe place, no breakfast, no lunch, no support. It's the students that have potential but need extra support, encouragement, and motivation. It's the students that are missing an opportunity to break the cycle. All students are not the same and should not be treated as such. With that being said, as the ministry comes out with the plan moving forward, will our COVID recovery plan become tighter, more specific, and focused?
Who would like to answer that?
I believe it's Director Kelly. I believe that question was asked earlier, Trustee Cook, and we will do our very best to attempt to give more details on that. Of course, that is our work, and we will continue to do that.
Is there supplementary?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are through the list of questions that are on my queue. So we will move to notices of motion. Is there a notice? Trustee Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next meeting, I have a recommendation that while emergency measures exist in the province of Ontario concerning the COVID-19 pandemic, the GECDSB will consistently present draft agendas with items of trustee question period and notices of motion for all special meetings of the board public session. And I have already presented that to admin and copied trustees.
Thank you. Are there any other notices? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, both chairs.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you all. Good night.